Today, we're going to talk about children whose parents have chronic mental illnesses. This video is going to cover psychological impacts on the life of the child who's growing up in a household where there is chronic mental illness in the parents. I hope it is helpful. Let's start to discuss with what exactly happens, why this topic is important. This topic is important because many times children who are growing up in households with chronic mental illnesses, they are neglected children. No one really pauses to notice what is going on, how the child is interpreting circumstances that can be rather overwhelming, depending upon the nature of the diagnosis that the parent has. Okay, so let's start with the relationships of the parents to one another. Okay, we all know that for every human being, the relationships between the two parents, that is very important for the psyche and the development of the child. It will also define our attitudes towards dating, relationships, marriage in the future, but not just that, it is also the very basis of our mental health in the longer run, right? Um, so if one parent has a chronic mental illness that's severe, it is bound to impact the marital relationship. It's bound to impact how the parents are navigating the challenges of the marriage also, right? Whether they consciously sit down, whether the parents sit down and decide that, this is how we're going to navigate parenting, this is how we're going to navigate these factors. More often than not, it's not something that a conversation is had about. And that is, and the conversations can be had if the parent has the diagnosis of, let's say, a generalized anxiety disorder or a major depressive disorder, or even perhaps OCD to some degree, where if the insight is present, if it's a disorder where there is insight, where there is acceptance and realization in the parent that I do have a mental illness, I am suffering from something, then there is a conscious conversation that goes on between the parents that can help in strategically navigating the challenging circumstances that might be chronic in nature. But if the nature of the illness is such that the insight, the acceptance in the parents is limited into the impact of the illness, into this, if the parent does not accept that they have a disorder, then things become way more challenging, right? Then a conscious conversation is not had, and the patient or the parent in this case may or may not be compliant with the treatment that's been given to them. And if they are not being treated, then the symptoms are pretty intense. It is impacting the entire family system, it is impacting the child as well, right? So the relationship between the two parents, coming back to that, right? um if, like, let's say the female partner, she has a chronic mental illness which is severe in nature and which is not, it's not in that state, it's not in that stage of the illness where it is well controlled, then, how does it impact the partner? If the husband is someone who is a relatively healthy, stable personality, he's going to have a support system, he's going to have friends, he's going to involve his family, he's going to ask for help, right? He's not going to turn to the child for emotional mental support. Okay, the child doesn't become a companion to this parent, right, in navigating these circumstances. But in many situations where the husband in this case, if the father in this case is not healthy, then, and it can be vice versa as well, even if it's the opposite sometimes, when there is an alliance between the parents and the child, that okay, we are in this together, we're partners, we're surviving this together, and that's often very glorified. A lot of parents do glorify that my child always understood my suffering, my child always took a stand for me, my child always helped me navigate my battles in life. But that is incredibly damaging to a child's psychological welfare, and the impacts will show maybe in the longer run. Okay, where the child has to navigate their life now as a grown up, and they have to kind of unlearn certain unhealthy things that were expected out of them. So regardless, and the example here was of, if the female has the chronic illness, if the mother has the chronic illness, right? um if the father has a chronic illness, depending on the nature of the illness, whether it is in treatment, whether they are responsive to medicines or not, it can also be pretty jarring. Okay, if they are in a stage of the illness, if it's the early stages, and the episodes of the illness are frequent, right? It can impact the capacity of the parent of the father particularly to, and considering the Indian society, the father is often seen as the family member who's going to earn, right? So if his capacity to earn is compromised, then economic crisis is also something that comes into the picture, where the child from a young age, if it's not something that is healthily told to the child that these are the circumstances, if it is not, if the information given to the child is, usually the intellect of a child is undermined. It's like, ye kya samjhega? But a child is observing, a child is watching, a child is trying to modify their behavior to be easy enough for the parents to deal with in their already complex, already difficult life, right? And it can be pretty overwhelming for this child to go through life at even a young age, even through teenage. It can be pretty difficult for this child because it is so overwhelming and confusing, and his experiences, his or her lived experiences, are very different from what the average child might be having in their own household. Every household will have its ups and downs, but when there is an intense chronic mental illness in the parent, then it can be pretty scary for a child to navigate, especially if the conscious conversations are not had in an age appropriate manner, right? So this is, the impact of the parent, and also if, like, how the parent who's healthy, right, the parent who does not have the diagnosis, how they speak of the other parent who has the chronic mental illness, right, that will define the child's perspective a lot. If one parent has a vendetta against the other parent, right, that they're doing this intentionally, they are trying to harm me, they are trying to hurt me, it is because of them and their diagnosis that I'm not success in my career, for example. Now these messages are very confusing and very complicated for a child to process. That, okay, I love my parents, right? Instinctually a child would love their parents, right? I love my parent, but this parent is harming the other parent. While that might not be the full truth, right, that's not the reality, but the child will often accept what the parent has to say. And that will cause a discord, a disconnection, or that will cause some sort of a problem and a rift between the parent who has the chronic mental illness and the child in the system. Okay, so these are very complex things, and an age appropriate conversation, right, it's very important to be had. It is very important that no one is pitting the child against anyone, right? So the healthy parent should not be complaining about ganging up against the parent with the mental illness along with the child. Okay, so that's pretty damaging, right? um these are some of the nuances of the relationship between the parents, right? And how the parent without the diagnosis, how they're coping up. Are they, do they have a friend circle? Are they turning to alcohol? Are they turning to substance abuse for coping up? Are they seeking therapy for themselves? Are they not seeking therapy for themselves? Do they even accept that the circumstances are difficult for them to navigate? Okay, so that will, definitely, like, have a big impact on the child and their psyche and their well-being, right? um so I would say, if you are a parent navigating this stage of your life where your partner has been diagnosed with a chronic mental illness, have an age appropriate conversation with the child that this is the scenario. Include a mental health professional. Learn about the mental illness of your spouse, okay, and don't turn to your child for emotional and mental support. That is not age appropriate. Find support in support groups, find support through therapy, okay. uh, Yes, and this is the childhood part of it. The internal experience of the child is pretty overwhelming. And even if we don't see any impacts in the short term, in the longer run, the child might have to deal with a lot of anxiety gradually after growing up. So it's something that we really need to take care of. And sometimes, when these children, they grow up and when they reach adolescence, it can be um, either, they start trying to um, parent the parent with the mental illness. So you can see that or they try to go out and start earning at a very young age as compared to what is normal in your culture, in your society. They either become avoidant of the household. If the age appropriate conversations were not there, if the space, the emotional space for the child to just be a child was not there, right, then we can definitely see these things happening. The child, the adolescent getting into substance, getting into inappropriate relationships that are sexually unsafe, right? All these things can happen many times. So the availability of a non-overwhelming safe space where the child can just be a child, right? Secure attachment with the child, where the child can come and talk to the parent who's healthy, that I am not able to understand, I'm not able to cope up, this is scary, or this is overwhelming, this is too much for me to handle, or I don't feel like going to school sometimes, or I'm not able to make sense of my academics. So if the child has that consistent space, the outcomes can be much better. The child doesn't have to go through as much suffering after growing up, right? If they have that consistent space. So this brings into conversation of also grandparents and their role in these situations. So some nuclear families might, you know, reach out either to the grandparents to come and help in, to step in and take care of the child. And depending on the personality of the grandparents, this can be a boon or it can be a curse. So if the grandparent is someone who is unhealthy, who does not create a balanced kind of a perspective, right? If they are constantly shaming the parent that has the mental illness, if they are constantly blaming, speaking negative things, or many times if they say things like this to their to their child, that leave this, leave your partner and marry someone else, they'll be better, or leave the individual who has the chronic mental illness and start fresh, so such messages are too overwhelming for the child, and these messages are often given, so it is very jarring, very overwhelming for the child. And people more often than not are not realizing that the child is listening and absorbing all of these things and constantly trying to grapple with the sense of who am I in all of this, right? So grandparents or extended relatives can be a boon, can be a strength if they have healthy personality. But if they're very dysfunctional individuals themselves, right, then instead of seeking their support, seek professional help. Get a good nanny, get a good a professional who can step in and take care of the child. That would be a much better option than involving relatives that are pretty unhealthy, and people who have unstable personalities, people who are borderline abusive. So if you feel your relatives have always done more harm than good, then it's not the best idea to involve them. And the idea is not to isolate yourself. The idea is at least to pick the least problematic person in the family system to look after the child, if you don't have any other options, if it's not feasible to afford a nanny or full-time help or support, right? um, the academic structure, okay. Many times the children, like when they go to school, sometimes they can either feel the school is a safe space, it's a refuge, depending on if they're able to make friends. If they're not able to make friends, then again it becomes a jarring and a limiting experience. So through all of this, instead of like, please don't get overwhelmed by this information. It's only to say that this is a perspective that a parent should have if their spouse has a chronic mental illness, right? um, Take your time to mindfully formulate a plan to identify people who are genuine assets in terms of rearing the child, in terms of growing the child up, and involve them, provide the child with consistent safe spaces where they can just be, and don't give conflicting information to the child that, oh, the other parent is this way, that way. No, never do that in front of the child, right? Deal with your things through seeking therapy and with your own friend circle, okay. And let the child engage into age appropriate spaces. Let them go for their sports classes, let them go for their play dates, let them go for their regular schooling, and let them do age appropriate things while they try and explore and find out themselves beyond the intense circumstances that are present at home. Okay, so while this information is a little heavy, I hope it is helpful. It is a part of a bigger conversation on chronic mental illnesses and their impact on society, on the individual themselves, on their family units, etc. I hope um, it could be of help to some degree. And if you like this video, please share it with someone who might benefit from this video. Subscribe to this channel. If you have any recommendations, or if you'd like to hear some more information on a topic related to these issues, please drop it on the comments, or you can feel free to mail me. It will be, my mail ID will be put up in the description box. Thank you so much and take care.